And I was just saying to everyone who's just jumped into this webinar, we are recording this session, so you will be able to access the recorded session in your emails, as a link will be sent directly to you. If you're one to take notes and you like to write things down on paper, you'll also receive a copy of this presentation in your emails as well. So just keep an eye on those. That will be available to you about 24 hours post-webinar, so keep your eyes on your emails tomorrow afternoon. So I will begin, and I will start with just a acknowledgement of country. So we do acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land in which we gathered today. We pay our respects to their elders, past and present, and recognise their continuing connection to land, waters, and culture. Just a general disclaimer for anyone who's new to our webinar program here. This presentation contains really general information and advice, so we make sure that all the information we're sharing with you today is evidence-based. It's not to substitute any individual treatment advice, so if you do have questions that relate directly to your treatment, I'll always advise you to go straight to your health care provider. But in saying that, I'll do my best to help you out with any questions that come to mind and any questions around self-management in the context of today's session. So let's see how we go. Today, we will be talking about inflammation, diet, and arthritis. We'll take a look at the link. We will speak about foods for inflammation and then take a deeper dive into the nutrients and where the evidence reliably points at the moment. I do have some supports and services to recommend for you if you're interested in taking the next step and implementing some of this information into your own daily lives. But I think what we need is some context here and why anti-inflammatory diets can be so powerful and can actually help with the better management of our arthritis. So let's start here. Nutrition, it does play an incredibly important role in terms of why a person might develop disease, but in terms of inflammatory diseases, why it could play a role in continuing to get worse. So if we look at the impact that diet and weight can have on disease, mechanics play a super important role. And we know that excess load can affect structural integrity of certain joints, particularly those load-bearing joints like the knees, the hip, joints in the feet, and that links in with carrying excess weight. But what we're coming to learn more about is the inflammatory component here. So the inflammatory component plays an important role, and we know there are certain factors in the diet that can either dial up inflammation or reduce inflammation. So this can affect things like symptom progression, disease activity, and that's what I want to hone in on today. A question we get asked all the time is there a special diet we can follow for arthritis? And unfortunately, the answer is no. But while there isn't a specific arthritis diet or a magic food that directly cures or treats a condition, we know that eating well can make a big difference. It can make a big impact on how someone feels and functions with the condition. And so it's really important to consider where the evidence reliably points and the impact it could potentially have on you. So let's take a deeper dive into this. The thing about inflammation, you might know this if you live with this, it doesn't just affect the joint, it affects the body at multiple levels, but I do want to start at the joint here. And if you think about what makes up the joint, it's made up of bone, cartilage, ligaments, muscle, and various tissues. And so when we break down what makes up these tissues and the structures, they're actually mostly dietary factors which all play a critical role in how the joint is made up, how healthy it is, or vice versa, how much the joint can be impacted. So we know that bone and cartilage are mostly calcium, vitamin D, vitamin K, phosphorus, boron, collagen. Protein makes up muscle. But then we have inflammatory substances and hormones that can directly and indirectly impact on these structures. And so the production of these substances can be influenced by how much added sugar is in the diet or how much trans fats we're consuming every day. Alcohol plays a role here as well. And then we have the knock-on effects to body weight, cholesterol, blood sugar levels, which can affect the risk of other things like heart disease and type 2 diabetes. And so the inflammatory molecules here interfere with a lot of different processes in the body, and they have different ways of affecting the cells in the joints. So this is where we want to think about the role of anti-inflammatory diets. So we know some inflammatory molecules are specifically linked to increasing synovial inflammation, which is essentially what causes that swelling of the joint lining and those noticeable kind of symptoms we see in rheumatoid arthritis and sometimes osteoarthritis. Another inflammatory molecule is known to increase things like bone remodeling, which can lead to abnormal bone growth in some types of arthritis. Some of us might be familiar with bone spurs. And so according to our best current data, we're learning that disease activity and symptoms might be influenced by certain foods. But if we're lacking certain nutritional factors, so if we're lacking vitamin D, vitamin K, perhaps it's calcium, then the condition can be compounded by these things. So in rheumatoid arthritis or any type of inflammatory arthritis, the pathology is really complex, given that it is autoimmune in nature. And so what I want to be clear is that addressing the diet can't prevent causation, it can't prevent a flare-up, but we do have more and more research coming out that suggests that modifying these things can lead to lower and fewer side effects from the flare-ups. It might help things like medication effectiveness and potentially influence the course of the disease. So in order to understand the role of inflammation and diet, we do have to take a look at the gut microbiome. And I'm sure you've heard of these things come up before. The gut microbiome is incredibly sensitive to the foods we eat. So if you're not familiar with what the gut microbiome actually is, I want you to think of it as being a home to trillions of bacteria that play a crucial role in health. Some of these bacteria are really beneficial for our health. They actively support digestion, immunity, overall well-being, energy levels. Some are commensal, meaning that they coexist without causing us any harm. So they kind of have very neutral effects in the body. But then you have the opportunistic or harmful bacteria, which are the ones that can feed into that inflammatory disease process, especially if they become too dominant. So added sugars and processed foods are kind of substrates that do feed harmful bacteria. They pretty much thrive off sugar and low fiber foods. Examples of low fiber foods might be white bread, white toast, plain pasta, noodles. I want you to think of cornflakes, rice bubbles, maybe water crackers. When the harmful bacteria are well fed, not only do they multiply, but they outnumber the beneficial bacteria, which are crucial for that gut health and control of inflammation in the body. So a healthy gut microbiome, it does thrive on diversity. The more variety of beneficial bacteria you have, the more your gut might be able to help protect against inflammation, might be able to help with the severity of symptoms. But then it's the diet that's high in processed foods, added sugars that tend to reduce the diversity. So that impacts on the gut's ability to control inflammation. And so if you didn't know, or if you haven't picked up, the gut is actually a major player in regulating the immune system. So this is why diets high in processed foods and sugars can alter the way the immune system functions. This is why it kind of has a role in promoting that chronic inflammation as opposed to controlling it. And so while we can point the finger at certain foods, it's really important to know that where the research currently sits is around diet it's around dietary patterns or themes. So if you want to get the anti-inflammatory benefits from a diet, we need to look at what we're having from morning to night, every day, every month, across a year. So it's more about the consistency, but we'll circle back to this when we take a look at what a well-rounded approach encompasses. So what does the evidence say? Saturated fat, for starters. This is often what you find in your animal-based foods. So tropical oils, processed foods, convenience style foods, very rich in our Western diets. This has been linked with increased cartilage damage in people with osteoarthritis. Other evidence suggests that omega-3 fatty acids, often found in your oily fish, your flax seeds, your walnuts, think nuts and seeds, and even supplements. So evidence suggests they may have a modulatory effect on rheumatoid arthritis, which could potentially reduce things like swollen joints and help with reducing inflammation. We'll circle back to this shortly. But there is the role of extra body weight, which I won't delve too much into today. But I do want you to know that this does increase the stress on many joints, particularly load-bearing joints. We know that for every additional 5 kilos overweight, not only increases your risk of osteoarthritis by 1/3, but we know for a person who lives with osteoarthritis, for every kilo overweight, there's an extra 4 kilos of load that's being placed on the joint. So think about the physical stress that's causing on your joints. So there's that mechanical perspective, but what we know is that fat tissue, particularly the visceral fat, the fat we find around our bellies, we know that's active tissue, which has the ability to produce these inflammatory, what we call cytokines. And I'll refer to that a couple of times as we move through the evidence. But we know these cytokines can promote systemic inflammation. They can worsen osteoarthritis by accelerating breakdown of cartilage. We know it plays a role in how we perceive pain, and it can cause further damage to joint structures. So when someone's overweight, there's more than just what's going on mechanically, but it's more about the inflammatory state that can influence disease progression, not just in osteoarthritis, but it does have a role in rheumatoid arthritis as well. So excess weight, it does place a lot of stress on the knee and hip joints. But what's interesting is that there is a relationship between excess weight and hand arthritis. Why this is actually interesting is because we can't have mechanical stress on the hands due to carrying the excess weight and the symptoms coming on from that load. So this is why we're now thinking about the metabolic factors that are involved due to circulating inflammatory molecules. So in the context of someone carrying excess weight and from a dietary perspective, this is why saturated fat has an emerging area of interest, particularly with its devious role in arthritis. So very recently, looking at the research, there's been several studies that have looked at the effects of high fat, high carbohydrate diets, of course, in the context of rats. And rats, as we know, are very different to humans, but the results are still applicable. In a study that followed over 2,100 participants over a period of 4 years, there was a dose-response relationship between saturated fat intake and then joint space width loss. And they looked at this in the knee. So when researchers looked at the dietary intakes of fat and they looked at how many total calories were actually coming in just from saturated fats, they found that those who were consuming the highest amounts of saturated fats had the greater changes in radiographic progression of osteoarthritis. So they looked at an X-ray, they looked at the structural changes in the knee, and they found there were noticeable differences in terms of disease progression in people that were consuming lots of saturated fats. And so they were able to confirm their hypothesis that individuals who are consuming diets that are higher in saturated fats have almost up to 60% greater risk of osteoarthritis progression compared against those who were eating the lowest amounts of saturated fats. So this tells us a couple of things. It tells us that osteoarthritis is a result of more going on in the metabolism as opposed to just wear and tear like we've traditionally thought the disease to be. But two, diet can have a lot to do with these changes. So saturated fats, they do have a role in mounting an immune response that contributes to ongoing breakdown and weakening of structural tissues. So this is where the takeaway could be that cutting back on saturated fats could have an important role in your self-management here. So you will come across a lot of advice online about eating or avoiding certain foods because of pro or anti-inflammatory effects. But the science isn't really anywhere solid enough to really blame or make any singular food a hero. But we know that excessive intakes of saturated fats, trans fats, coincides with an increased risk of health issues. We know this a bit more in the context of heart disease, stroke, diabetes. And we know that the fewer the plant-based foods that are coming into your diet, it can have negative effects on arthritis. So it's always about the overall dietary pattern. Fats can absolutely be part of a balanced diet, which is why it's about more moderating the consumption of those foods and choosing healthier fats that come in, like olive oil, avocados, nuts, seeds, could be a really good goal. If you're wondering where your saturated fats are actually found, you can think processed meats like bacon, sausages, convenience foods, full fat dairy products, cream, cheese, milk, butter, and processed baked goods. So cakes, pastries, those sweet treats at night. And again, we don't want to restrict these foods entirely, but it's really good to be aware of how these foods could be affecting you and could be hindering any progress you're making when it comes to symptom management. Then if you're taking medication, disease-modifying anti-rheumatic drugs or biologics, it's important to be aware of alcohol consumption as well. That requires really careful consideration. There used to be a lot of hype around the anti-inflammatory benefits of red wine for their polyphenols. But what has been made really clear is that it's still alcohol, and there are some arthritis medications that can affect and interact with alcohol and lead to things like depletion of essential nutrients, stomach bleeds, reduced drug effectiveness. So this is really important consideration for tissues and cells in the joint. So let's move away from what should be avoided, but move to the active ingredients of foods which might be able to make a difference. And let's start with looking at where the research is pointing. So omega-3 fatty acids get a lot of attention in this landscape. For good reason though. They are the most widely studied active ingredients that have shown to play a protective role, particularly when given in isolation. So there's a lot of evidence behind the health benefits that come with taking omega-3s. These have been well documented, and this is why you see its use supported by a lot of peak health bodies like the Heart Foundation. When we think about our muscles as well and the way they support our joints, it's really important to think about maintaining or building that muscle mass, because that's going to help dissipate any kind of forces on the joint, particularly if it's riddled with osteoarthritis. That muscle needs essential nutrients. So this is why we talk about the importance of protein and vitamin D, even antioxidants. Particularly protein, we need for all our cells to grow, repair, recover, and function properly. It's one of those key ingredients that play an important role for preventing muscle loss, which becomes a really important subject the more we get older. So when protein requirements aren't being met, We know this can negatively affect muscle breakdown. It can affect our joints. The less muscle that's available around your joints, the more load and force that joint is going to have to bear, thereby feeding into that symptom progression. So making sure your protein intake is adequate, making sure you're eating enough, that also goes for vitamin D as well. Antioxidants have also received a lot of attention, and this is more due to the mechanisms around vitamin C and vitamin E. Vitamin C being relevant owing to its role in collagen formation and reducing oxidative stress in tissues and membranes. Vitamin E is also said to be protective against free radicals. So we'll take a look at what that means shortly. So like I said earlier, there's been a lot of studies to support the role of omega-3 and how it works for inflammation. Very recently, we had research to the level of a meta-analysis that involved 9 randomized controlled trials. So I want you to think gold standard of research that involved over 2,000 adults with osteoarthritis. So this study aimed to evaluate the influence of omega-3s on symptom and joint function, and the results were really promising, with an overall benefit seen in arthritis pain and joint function in those who are living with osteoarthritis. So it suggests it might have a positive role in pain release and mobility. I need to highlight that this research, it was based on supplementation as opposed to food, but the results still complement the research that exists with the benefits of, say, increasing your fish intake or increasing how many nuts and seeds you're having in your diet. It is generally recommended to get these omega-3s from your foods, and this is because your foods are always going to provide more beneficial nutrients like proteins and vitamins and minerals, all those things that are essential for your body to function properly. In terms of how omega-3s fare for inflammatory types of arthritis, this is still under investigation, but promising studies have found omega-3s to be quite helpful for reducing morning stiffness and pain, and the need for non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs like Nurofen during an active flare. So again, this is based on supplementation as opposed to food, but it still complements the benefits of increasing the intake through food. We don't really know how much of these food sources we need to be eating to get these therapeutic benefits. This is why it's kind of hard to say, this is the food you need to get those anti-inflammatory benefits, because we don't know how much is going to be not only consumed, but metabolized, absorbed, digested. And we don't have the data to confidently say this is what's going to give you the therapeutic benefits. But we can say that eating 2 to 3 servings of fatty fish per week, having lots of nuts and seeds regularly in your diets, is an important part of an anti-inflammatory diet. So on to vitamin D. It's very long known for its role in keeping bones healthy, but there is a growing list of health benefits being linked back to diabetes and cardiovascular disease, autoimmune diseases, multiple sclerosis, and more. But unlike most other nutrients that we get from food, vitamin D is one where only a few foods contain it. So fish, milk, eggs, but fortunately we can make all we need from sun exposure, which makes up to more than 80% of vitamin D in the body. So in 2014, there were actually 2 studies that explored the relationship between your vitamin D and osteoarthritis. There was one published in the Journal of Nutrition that found that individuals with low vitamin D levels had more than double the risk of knee osteoarthritis progression compared to those with sufficient levels of vitamin D. There was another study that discovered that older adults with moderate vitamin D deficiency were also more likely to experience new or worsening pain symptoms. It's still really unclear at this stage to say whether restoring those vitamin D levels can improve osteoarthritis symptoms, but it proves that there is more research needed in this area because there is a link there. So studies have also found that there is a link between low vitamin D levels and increased disease activity in rheumatoid arthritis. What we know is, interestingly, this relationship might be bidirectional because we know that inflammatory cytokines, the ones I mentioned before, can actually influence vitamin D metabolism, potentially leading to decreased serum levels during a period of heightened disease activity. So much like everything else, we need more research to understand this link, but the takeaway could be that monitoring and manage those vitamin D levels could have an important role in that comprehensive RA care. So this is all under active investigation at the moment. At this point, there's no compelling reason to supplement your diet with vitamin D solely for the purpose of improving symptoms or attenuating disease activity. But getting enough vitamin D through the sun, getting enough vitamin D through your food sources is going to be important for overall general well-being, bone health, osteoporosis prevention, healthy muscle function, even healthy immune function. So if you are deficient in vitamin D, or you suspect you might be, this is where supplementing the diet will have no harm. Always talk to your doctor about this, but it could be beneficial for you. So the next thing I do want to talk about is oxidative stress, and I briefly touched on that earlier. It's one of the many proposed mechanisms that actually underpin that joint and bone degeneration in many types of arthritis. So oxidative stress, you can see what's happening with the tomato here. It's basically when there are too many free radicals in the diet, can trigger inflammation, and it can basically, these free radicals are created in part of the inflammatory process, and they cause damage to various cells in the body, including cells in the bone, cartilage, tendons, and ligaments. And this is why antioxidants in the diet have become a growing area of interest. It's suggested they're able to help things like calm that inflammation, protect cells, provide relief, and they might be able to offer that protection against those cells and tissues by addressing the underlying driver of the damage. So we don't have sufficient data to actually show a direct benefit from antioxidant supplementation, particularly in the context of osteoarthritis and rheumatoid arthritis. But if you do plan on increasing your intakes of food with vitamin C or supplementing it, just know the benefits aren't guaranteed, but there's no real harm in increasing that intake through food. If you're wondering where antioxidants can be found, it's in a variety of foods. So your fruits, vegetables, herbs, nuts, seeds, even some oils. And so a diet rich in antioxidants might be able to help manage oxidative stress, but we do need to look at investigating this further to confidently recommend this as part of a treatment approach. We need to investigate the potential links between circulating antioxidants derived from the diet and validate how well antioxidants obtained from the diet can protect against this oxidative stress. So how can we get all these wonderful nutrients that I've just mentioned? I do want to start with this healthy plate model that you can see here on the right. And I'm sure many of you have come across this model at some point in your day or your life. It's basically a simple visual guide to help you create balanced meals. So it focuses on portioning the plate to include a variety of nutrients. It's an easy way to get all those antioxidants in, get in that sufficient protein and minerals and vitamins that are important for health. You can see by portioning out the plate with vegetables and fruits is a good starting point. The more colors, the more vitamins, minerals, and fiber you're going to be able to get. Protein by quartering out your plate with a lean source like chicken, turkey, or fish, or even plant-based proteins like your tofu, your legumes, or beans. This is a great way to support those muscles, support muscle function, protect against muscle loss, and supports your overall metabolism. Another quarter of the plate is should be whole grains or starches. You can think of this being your brown rice, your quinoa, sweet potatoes, whole wheat pasta. Think of long-lasting energy sources, rich in fiber and great for that gut microbiome. And then healthy fats, which don't get enough recognition in our Australian dietary guidelines, but you can absolutely add small amounts of healthy fats to your meals, like extra virgin olive oil, avocado, nuts, seeds. These have a wide range of benefits and essentially what make up an anti-inflammatory diet. So while you can think about portioning your plate out the way it looks on the right here, if you want to think about how this can apply to the meals you make for dinner or lunch, have a look at the pictures on the left here. You can see how these recommendations translate to meals that can easily be made at home. So we have teriyaki chicken and veg, stir fry, quinoa, yogurt and a fruit bowl. We have a sandwich at the bottom. There are so many different versions and iterations of an anti-inflammatory diet. And again, it's not really about dismissing the potential benefits or drawbacks of individual foods. So rather than focusing on those single ingredients or those so-called superfoods, it's more effective to look at the overall pattern. So a well-rounded anti-inflammatory approach, it typically includes a variety of colorful fruits and vegetables and whole grains and healthy fats, healthy protein sources. You'll see that it is limited in those highly processed foods, those added sugars, and excessive amounts of processed meats. So instead of narrowing in on one food, you can see from this example, there's an abundance of healthy protein, high fiber, healthy fats. It's packed with nutrients. And for some people, we know that these meal plans aren't always achievable, which is why it can be sometimes better to focus on general principles or foundations or targets you can set yourself in your everyday diet. So I'm sure all of us at some point have heard of the Mediterranean diet. And, you know, the Mediterranean diet has garnered a lot of attention. It's an overall well-rounded diet that emphasizes more on the quality of foods. It is very rich in all those vitamins, minerals, and antioxidants that coincide with reducing inflammation, promoting healthy weight, providing nutrients essential for joint health. And if you've ever tried some of these meals, it's absolutely delicious. So it's super easy to stick to and be consistent with it. So from the palatability perspective, it's delicious, but it also is one of the most widely studied diets that it's not only supported by many observational studies, but a number of different randomized controlled trials. And so it's very well known for its role in reducing inflammation in the body in the context of heart disease. Research is growing in terms of how it can help with osteoarthritis, musculoskeletal inflammation, and the way it's able to help maintain a healthy diet. So the Mediterranean style diet is one of those variations of an anti-inflammatory diet with the inclusion of fish and extra virgin olive oil. So it does help with promoting that healthy gut microbiome. It has a way of strengthening the immune system. It contains an abundance of fiber, polyphenols, prebiotics, and all that good stuff. And we could go on about the benefits of the Mediterranean diet and the evidence behind it. But what's important to take away from it is that it's largely about its composition, so its overall makeup. It's dominated by foods like fruits, vegetables, legumes. Whole grains are going to help with the promotion of things like short chain fatty acids, which are excellent for gut health. Fermented foods like yogurt, kefir, traditional cheeses like feta or goat's cheese, extra virgin olive oils rich in polyphenols. You'll see that there's often lots of nuts and seeds that are a very strong part of this diet. It does encourage regular consumption of fish and seafood, having fresh fruit every day, having legumes 2 times per week, and using herbs and spices for flavor. So these are some general rules of thumb which you could aim to implement. So something to acknowledge and recognize is that when you do live with arthritis, your days look very different. And this is where it could be good to consider meal prepping or food delivery services if you are wanting to explore this a bit further. So the Australia's meal delivery landscape, it encompasses a variety of services that cater to different needs. So you have meal kit delivery services and prepared meal delivery services. There are services that can be available through NDIS, and they're available to home care package participants. And these are often prepared by dietitians, but the reason they can be beneficial is because not only do they save you from having to walk through the supermarkets, carrying heavy groceries, standing for too long, they come with pre-portioned ingredients, very easy instructions. Sometimes if the meals are already prepared, they just need reheating, which could be great if you're dealing with a flare or feeling fatigued. Meal planning, we know, can be very overwhelming at times, especially if you're already dealing with chronic pain. So these services are just another way to kind of take that physical and mental load off. They offer a lot of different types of diets, anti-inflammatory style diets, low sodium, heart healthy diets. So there could be that good in between step as well between building confidence in cooking without being overwhelmed. So could be a great option for people who are newly diagnosed or just generally trying to shift to a more anti-inflammatory eating pattern. So there are a lot of professionals who are actually available to support you and can offer expert guidance. You can definitely ask your GP about connecting with a dietitian. So dietitians are, have the expertise and the knowledge and skills to look at your specific needs and provide you with personalized advice. They might have healthy eating or nutrition programs you can join. The Get Healthy service is a government-led program. It's free to join. It's basically a phone service where you can get expert advice from qualified professionals to help you achieve your goals. And then Nutrition Australia is a non-profit organisation, but they have a lot of resources, recipes, meal ideas, healthy eating guides that could be available to you to help you adopt that more anti-inflammatory style. So if you're not sure where to start, always start with your GP. They will likely have someone in their networks they can directly connect you with. So that brings us to the end of our session. What I might do is open the floor to questions, but I can see the chat box is growing. It's going off at the moment. So what I'll do is I'm just going to pause the recording here and I'll allow Bree to ask me